Hello, hello, everybody. Hi. Can we give Richard Curtis another round of applause, please? Richard, you've got to that stage in life and you've earned it, that you don't just get one round of applause, you get at least two, my dear. So lovely to have you with us, and I'm very much looking forward to this conversation.
I'm so grateful for you being here now to guide me through this.
It's an absolute
strange
pleasure.
thesis.
So, of course, the title of this discussion is, Can Film and TV do more to change the world? And I think the wonderful thing about that title, Richard, is it suggests that we know for sure TV and film can change the world, so that's a given.
Yes.
The conversation now is around what more can be done. So if we can start, of course, it's a very big title. It's a big question. What's been on your mind?
Right. Yeah, I've just invented, just while I was outside, I thought, this is an example not of WIP, not of work in progress, but TIP.
Which is?
Thought in process.
Okay, all right.
So it's a really great opportunity in a way just to discuss this, as it were, with you guys, which is just the idea of whether television is and films are as efficacious in the real world as they should be.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you my starting point, which is often the starting point of something is not really a sort of symbol of it. But I was on this morning, on the couch of this morning, and I was talking about, I think 9 months ago, and I was talking about a campaign that I'm part of called Make My Money Matter, and what was about was moving pensions, us moving our pensions from things which do harm, deforestation, oil, etc., all that stuff, to, as it were, sustainable investment. And it's a really big way of helping companies that want to do stuff, and it's been quite a success. We're part of a campaign that's moved about 1.3 trillion pounds.
Wow.
And I finally, on this subject, squeezed like 40 seconds to talk about it, because they wanted to talk about Love Actually and Christmas and everything like that. And as I was going out, I thought, wow, this is like something where if everybody in the country did move their pensions, it would have a huge effect on the climate. I'm, scraping for seconds on the telly, and the telly is on 24 hours a day, 360 days a year for 70 years, and has television realized its power to actually make practical change. So I'm obsessed by telly. I do nothing but watch television.
Well, you do it well.
And the don't miss Colin from accounts, and nobody wants this. And and there are so many amazing shows which have been about incredibly important issues. And I always say to make things happen, you have to make things. But once we've made things...
What happens after?
Are we making the things that we've made make the things that they should make happen?
Yeah.
That's my question.
Yeah. And is it by design enough? Because sometimes good things happen after, but that wasn't necessarily the intention.
Exactly. I think we should be looking at mechanisms, mindset, and money.
Yeah.
Because I don't really think...
3 M's, everyone. Do you remember that?
I just wonder whether or not it's on the top of, or anywhere enough on the agenda of people who are in film and in television to actually say, I've got this extraordinary thing, now how can I use it?
Yeah, totally.
I think a lot of people make amazing things and then just hope for the best. It's as though they run the race and then don't pick up the award. Now, can I just say, there are a lot of people doing a lot of things. The more I look into it, the more I realize how much is happening. But I still think it's not at the core or one of the core tenets of broadcasters. And that's what we want to chat through today.
And I'd be interested to hear from you why you think that is. Because if you look at business in general, particularly consumer-led brands and products, we've seen the rise of B Corps, we've seen the rise of products that give 10% to charity, etc., and it being actually good for their bottom line.
Yeah.
Why don't you think this is happening enough in our industry?
Well, I think there are lots of issues. I mean, I've got here the brilliant Ofcoms thing for the BBC, which says it is essential when highlighting areas that the BBC does not appear to be advocating any political solution or actively encouraging any public campaign or lobby. So there are pretty strict things, particularly on the BBC.
How did you get around it then with all the stuff you've
well,
done?
exactly. But I think, and I've been talking to a lot of people in our business, and actually they're more flexible to the idea than they ever have been. And I'm not sure, as it were, the rules are always the best, always the best rules. But it isn't, So just on the B Corp, for instance, I've been talking to businesses about the Sustainable Development Goals, the Millennium Development Goals for years. In 2005, I could not get a conversation with anyone in business when we did Live 8. Wow. Honestly, we had 2 meetings, and in both of them, they looked at me like I was Che Guevara, and I'm very much not.
And that was 2005.
Yeah, wow. And now, 2015, it could be said in the last 10 years, businesses have done more in a more committed way for the Sustainable Development Goals than politicians have. And you see whole businesses.
Media.
Yeah, well, that's the question. You see whole businesses that have gone from corporate social responsibility, which was a couple of token things where you'd say, well, we put a bit of our money into this lovely project, to responsible social corporations. And they actually align everything that they do, and they change each one of their, Unilever changes every product to make sure that the supply chains and everything are right. You genuinely see businesses saying it's our business not only to make money and satisfy our shareholders, but actually to change the world. And I wonder whether broadcasting, which used to be so far ahead, so progressive, has actually not thought seriously enough about, I'm just going to give the one, as it were, obvious thing, which is when you watch a program with passionate or disturbing subject matter, all of you will know that at the end they say, if you have been affected or concerned by this issue, call this number.
Helpline or whatever.
They never say, if you want to do something about this issue, if you would like to get involved. If you watch something about pension poverty, they say, if you've been affected by, or about domestic violence, not you can help. There are lots of really great sort of call centers and things that you can do in your local community. They don't say that. They say, if you're a victim, do something, but they don't see it as their job to suggest that the people who are watching actually could do something about it.
Do you think that's easier with commercial television or film rather than PSBs, as you
Well, I don't know.
discussed?
I don't know about the rules, and you'll have to forgive me for being smoking on facts, but I'm actually told that the best people on this are PBS, or the Public Broadcasting System in America. And ABC in Australia, I'm told, are very, very strong on this. So I think that we're in a period of transition, and what I'm just asking is whether or not the people with most power should ask themselves whether they've got this amazing resource which they're actually not quite
utilizing enough.
Using, exactly.
I'm interested to know how many of you are in TV or film in this room. There's a few. Okay, we have a few in there, so you've been given your marching orders. So what are the programs that you think perhaps could have gone even further? They had enough of an impact.
I've just done a random list.
Yes, can you?
I've done a random list.
And why? Should we go through a couple of them?
I'll be very quick, because I know we haven't got much time. But I've just written here, Secret Millionaire, Barbie, Inside Out, 12 Years a Slave, Pride, Amy, Small Axe, I May Destroy You, Sherwood, The Long Shadow, Top Boy, Sex Education. These are all amazing shows, and they achieve the amazing thing of making people passionate, thinking, and worry.
And informed.
But do they then try and transform that into action? I think Barbie could have been the most amazing tool in terms of
gender equality
and
for
empowerment. There is so much slavery still in the world today,
Yeah.
when they started to make that extraordinary film, 12 Years a Slave, did they do deals? Did they try and get it into education systems?
Yeah.
Did they stop classes in schools being dull on that subject and make it interesting? And my suspicion is,
No.
on the whole, they haven't. So you watch Sherwood, you think, this is fantastic. What can we do about local poverty, about knives in this country, about all the brilliant projects helping young people? No help.
No. At all.
You don't get any help. And I think it's a really interesting time because I think most people, I remember, when we were young and you saw a program on the telly, what do? You go to your phone and call 911 or what? But now you're watching the TV, most people are watching the TV on devices where they could simply click saying, if you want to take action on this issue, go to this, and you can move. Actually, you've got a nation which could really move
And
fast.
you could see the immediate impact as well.
And there are amazing
Yeah.
examples. So It's a Sin. And again, I don't know whether they pre-did the deal, but once that had been done, I think inquiries into the Terence Higgins fund went up by 300% in the next few weeks. And they put one T-shirt on sale which said "La," which was a sort of quote from that. And they made £500,000 from the sale of that T-shirt. And obviously, we've just had this brilliant example of Mr. Bates against the post office.
fantastic.
Now,
Yeah.
ITV did not deliberately say sign anything, but signatures, went from,
Yeah.
I think, 15,000 to 1 million.
Yeah.
And so people are making these great shows, but I don't know that we're then saying, but wait a minute.
This is the follow through.
We could make it happen in the real world.
So could you give me an example of the kind of collaboration you think would work post one of those shows?
Well, let me give you that. So there are a couple of people because I'm just TIP thinking about this. Yeah. But I would really like you all to look into something called Doc Society, which used to be called Brit Doc. And I remember meeting them about 10 years ago, and they told me there'd been this movie called The Invisible War. And when they made it, which was about rape in the American Armed Forces, and when they made it, they paid Brit Doc, as it was then, for as it were an impact officer. And what Brit Doc achieved is they had a number of screenings in the Pentagon. Everybody who was running the Pentagon saw it, and now every American soldier, before they sign up, has to watch this film.
Wow.
So there are so many people who made films about serious subjects and then said, I hope. Whereas the question is, if you pre-plan, could you do stuff? And they also, recently, they were giving me an example of a film called The Territory, which is about deforestation and taking of lands in South America. And again, they joined the group, they consulted people, they got it out. It's led to massive changes by big companies about what they do on deforestation. It's become, as it were, the symbol, the way that people who are facing the problems there argue. So by pre-planning and saying we're not only making a film and hoping it shows at some festivals, but we're actually turning it into
A movement.
a movement, a weapon for change.
Yes.
So, those would be real examples. And one of the things I'm particularly interested in is why this doesn't happen with non-fiction. With fiction.
Yeah.
And I remember talking to Brit Don. They said, oh, no, the filmmakers wouldn't want it. It kind of destroys their purity of purpose and everything like that. And I don't believe that. I think, Asif was here earlier. I think if Amy could be used as a way of talking to people about drugs and stuff like that, I suspect that he would be extremely interested in that happening. And then the more you talk to people in the film industry, they say, oh, yeah, because film people are nervous because they don't want people to watch the films and think, oh, this is a campaigning tool, it has a secret agenda, we don't want to be attracted by the right-wing press. But I think that it would actually be something that filmmakers could really enjoy. And
I
could
wonder how you could then factor that into the sort of award side of things as well. Imagine if there was something specific for this at the Oscars or whatever.
Well, and I want to start a conversation with BAFTA about this. So BAFTA have this brilliant thing called ALBA. BAFTA take the lead so well on, diversity, on representation, and ALBA is their initiative for climate. And I feel there should be an award for the most impactful television series, as they were, and film of the year. And you could actually, so the idea that BritDoc have started to talk about is to have an impact officer, and apparently they've trained an enormous number, and that would be someone who came on at the beginning of a film, at the beginning of a documentary
With a
or a TV
criteria.
show, with criteria, with a little bit of money, and actually say, who can we partner with, how can we make it work, how could it be effective? And that becomes a new way of thinking about your work. Not only did it move people, but did it move people to action?
What are the barriers that you think are embedded into the industry that make this harder, or at least seem harder?
Well, I think they are it not being part of the mindset. I mean, I genuinely think, if you look at other businesses, I remember talking to a guy who ran a very major corporation about 5 years ago, and he said, Richard, it's very good, but he was Italian, by the way.
I was just checking.
I mean, he was really Italian. No, but he said, it sounds great, but it's never going to reach the boardroom. And then 3 years later, he said, we talk about it every single board meeting. So I think that there's nervousness, in Channel 4 and in British TV we've had very hostile government for a lot of years. This may be about to change. So I think it's nervousness about sort of the law and responsibilities in TV, but it's good to push against that. And in films, I think it's nervousness about commerciality. I think it's nervousness about being seen to be
and
campaigning.
whether an audience wants it.
Yeah, but
the audience does,
but
particularly a
I
younger
think the audience
audience.
does. I think so. We're in this really interesting. I don't know how many of you watch After Sun when you finished watching Love Island, or watch an extra slice when you finish. But My daughter doesn't watch Real Housewives any longer. She just watches the Real Housewives, the recap. But there's so much of this where they, as it were, take a thing and then deconstruct it, and it would be so easy and extra programming. And cheap. So I think it's not part of the mindset. I don't think there's much money in it. And I think there's a kind of nervousness and not the mechanisms. But I don't know how many of you, as it were, watched I May Destroy You. If you take that program. Now, I would have thought that iPlayers should have had a program with Michaela and all people who work in this area. I think a lot of people who watch the show would have said, fuck, what can I do? How does this happen? How often does it happen?
And
how can you get over it?
What's
the law?
Assault, correct,
exactly. Just have a 20-minute show, and that show then refer you
on what you can do.
onto what you can actually do. Because, in some ways, the motto of this of Kite Festival might be, Christ, it looks like we're fucked this year, because the world is troublesome more than it was a year ago, more than it was 10 years ago, one of the answers is public, active involvement in all the issues where we would love to make a difference.
And as we know, TV and film. I agree. Yes. Completely, and as we know, TV and film has a way of uniting people, connecting people, and moving people. But what you're talking about is giving them the tools.
Yeah, and by the way, in movies, and I'm just going to go to my notes here, and one of the things which made me think about this is there was an American company called Participant.
Of course.
And Participant was set up to do exactly this. And they've just stopped operating because they had a complex financial model where they were mainly interested in doing this job with films they made. And if you make films with the intention of being worthy,
that was the go-to
you will have as many failures as normal films do. But they made this film called Roma, which I think won the Oscar. But Roma had a huge effect and was used to change the law on migration, and they specifically did that, and they made a film called Spotlight, which also won the Oscar. And
Waiting
then
for Superman.
And then Spotlight turned into a massive effect on corruption and perversion in the Catholic Church, but also that film then led to a foundation being set up with philanthropists for investigative journalism, like that described in Spotlight. So it's not that it's not
viable,
or viable. It's just that it's not part of the mechanism. And I was You
What
know,
happens now the participant's gone? Because then the responsibility falls upon the whole industry.
exactly. So there was a letter signed by 182 people in the American film industry. I was surprised to find I was one of them. Directly
You'll
under
have to ask Emma, probably.
directly under Francis Ford Coppola. Exactly, saying, what do we do now? And that's in a way what I'm saying, which is if everybody started to think about it. And I'm interested in sort of sustainability officers have become something on all films now. They weren't there 5 years ago.
Yep.
And I was talking to someone the other day who's doing that job for Jurassic Park, and she has a lot of money.
Yep.
I think the budget is, more than $500,000 to make sure that they can make sure that
It's
the
as
film
sustainable as
is
possible.
sustainable, is aiming for net zero, etc.
Yeah.
Well, why should not films that have a purpose have a budget of 250,000? That's like 3 ads on mainstream television to set up partnerships, potency, relationship
And
to
you're
education.
calling it an
everything like
impact
that.
producer.
Yeah, impact producers, and there are lots of them who've been trained up by Doc Society and all over the world. But I would say, by the way, that Britain is behind.
Are we?
And everyone who's involved or interested says we are behind. And this is interesting because there was a great, Richard Gabb was on stage here the other day. There was a great article I read the other day to say that last week, I think, of the top 10 programs on Netflix, 5 of them were made here by British talent. I mean, Britain is still an extraordinary producer of things,
yeah.
but weirdly, on this issue of proactively trying to encourage people to be involved with the issues raised, we're actually some of the most nervous.
Do you think that's also because, particularly in America, they're much more vocal about their philanthropy, whereas we sort of do it in a much more quiet way? Do you think that that's
I mean,
part of it?
There could be an element of that, and I think, I think there could be an element of that. But I do think it's, as it were, a new form of philanthropy, and there are some very interesting foundations that would be interested in backing, up this change in the world, through communication and through.
I'd like to chat more about you, if we may. Obviously, when it comes to using the medium of television for fundraising, you are prolific and without question unrivaled in terms of really making it work and knowing the formula. Now that less people are watching linear TV, I suppose the natural place is for this to go to the streamers. What would that even look like?
No, that is interesting. I mean, and by the way,
because the money out of the three pieces, the money bit.
All of the stations do. So I do Comic Relief, BBC does Children in Need, ITV does Sport Aid, Stand Up for Cancer. There's a great tradition of fundraising. And I do think it's interesting how effective it is.
Yes.
That people actually watch things and take actions. And the question is whether they take social actions rather than giving actions. I mean, one of the reasons why I think this is an interesting time is how do the streamers view their social responsibility?
Because they'll make the programs.
Yeah, and by the way, there was a show called Seaspiracy, which
course.
Had an enormous effect, even though actually a lot of people thought it was a
all
slightly
the kids throwing away the fish.
A slightly worrying program. But I do worry that it is not part of their that we are. It's a great opportunity. And that it's not part of their
focus,
share-based agenda or focus. And it is interesting. I don't think there have been fundraisers on the streamers.
No.
And I think, and when HBO started all those years ago, it did Comic Relief in America, and it was very radical and proactive and interactive. And relationships with the streamers are so interactive. They've got, in the moment you're interested in a show, it sends you to 5 other shows you might be interested in that are like that show. Well, shouldn't one of those shows that they send you to be a thing where you can actually make a difference and change? And then, but, you can be sure after Mr. Bates and the Post Office that ITV are looking for that wonderful feeling when you watch that show, thought, this is an injustice that I can rectify. And I think that it is a great feeling when you're watching something, you can do something about it. So, as it were, I want to be part of a movement of people who suggest that actually that TV could be much more muscular. By the way, I mean, since we're here with Tortoise, I feel the same about newspapers. Oddly enough, I feel the same, that newspapers talk a lot,
But don't do
but
enough.
once a year, they do a kind of, these are the charities we support. It's quite interesting, particularly again, since they're online.
I think Evening
I
Standard
just think it's
probably
not the
has been
part
one.
of the way
No.
people think about what they produce, that could that thing that you produce be turned into something that actually makes changes.
And I suppose the issue is they don't think that that's necessarily their purpose.
Yeah,
They'll write about the issue, but not necessarily campaign
yeah.
on it.
And it's deeply embedded.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I know some very serious filmmakers who've made some very successful, very passionate films. I feel shy about raising this issue with them.
Wow. How
You know, because, yeah, you know, we make our films, do that. But I've kind of smelt this before. It's quite interesting. When I made 4 Weddings, this is pretty to the side, but Mike Newell, who made it with me, who was, you know, a brilliant filmmaker, he was not the slightest bit interested in the poster or the trailers or the selling of the movie. He thought that was not his
job.
business.
Yeah.
And I was really interested in that because I wanted lots
That's
of people to
how
see our
people go
movie.
and see it,
Well, I
exactly.
think we're at that point
Right.
with people who make TVs and movies. They
Yes.
think, I've made it, it's great,
Yeah.
leave it be. Whereas I
Yeah.
think that could be
Yeah.
just the start of
Totally.
the efficacy of things. And actually, I think the repackaging for education. I was talking to someone at the BBC, and they said, "Well, yeah, but you've got to digitize everything. You've got to put it in new ways, and therefore it's difficult getting it into classrooms and stuff." But you know, let's do that.
'Cause you're gonna
Let's
have to do
say,
it anyway.
Let's try and make that something that you do with every program and every film that's powerful. And by the way, I don't know how much of your lives you spend watching movie stars selling their movies, but Christ, they're lost a lot of the time. And yet a lot of them are talking about amazing films that could make an amazing difference. And all that red carpet nonsense and all that PR stuff could be transformed into something where it's part of recruiting people to change.
Do you think, though, for some, particularly, you know, talent, the fear is also around cancel culture in this sort of this era that we're living in, where sometimes you're frightened of saying the wrong thing. So even if it is an issue which should be obvious, I think there is a certain level of caution as well because of the times that we're in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I do. I think people are nervous about being thought to be activists when what
Or
they
too
are.
preachy.
Or too preachy when they're artists. I've just never believed in that very much. Do you know what I mean? I think it would be a supplementary activity. I think people who watch the actual program would not feel I'm being preached to particularly. I think it would be anyone who's been moved by it would move on from there. So I think people are nervous, but often when you want to make a change, people are nervous because they're not quite thinking in that way. Whereas the moment you have a few hits that can show that they've actually changed society, people's aspirations would change and say, oh, well, actually, I've made this show. Why can't we make sure that actually we rectify the situation that we've been complaining about and worrying about? Yeah.
Totally. So do you think that there's a difference in terms of generations? Do you think that the younger generation are thinking much more like what you're describing? Or nobody is?
Well, I think it's a good time for that. I mean, this isn't really true, but certainly, you know, the idea that the way to solve problems was to give money, simply to give money to charities, was certainly more prevalent 30 years ago than it is now. You know, my kids definitely understand and more endorse the idea of structural, political change. They want charities both to raise money to help, but they want them to be looking at longer term solutions. So I think, and particularly in the way that people are watching TV now, I think that you would find a younger generation that was, as it were, open to that. And I've always thought that my job as a fundraiser or a campaigner was about opening the door and see how many people want to come through. And I think the door is just not wide enough open for all the incredible films that are made and all the incredible TV shows that are made to actually use them as a lever for change.
For
and I
real
think
change.
Yeah, and I think young people are roaming about issues. I mean, young people, I spent my whole life online following strange wormholes. But I think that if somebody, is a fan of a movie and says, I saw that, I was really moved by that, they're much more likely to end up somewhere and take action, by following it through. If it was made easy for them.
Totally. How are we doing for time? I'm going to see how are we doing. Good. Okay. Wonderful. Oh, wow. Okay. I'd like to. Is there anyone who can talk about something that they've seen that impacted them? Does anyone want to share? It'd be great to hear from someone in the audience. Does anyone? Yes, lady in the front here. Oh, there's two. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Hi.
Hi, hello. I've worked a lot on international development, and I've met you, Richard, through that, and Make Poverty History, and the amazing work that you helped put in the public eye about the Sustainable Development Goals, which are the 17 goals which all governments are signed up to make our world a better place. But the problem is that people don't really know that they belong to them. They are their goals. Our governments have signed up and should be delivering them. And now we're at a very tricky place about that. And I wondered, Richard, what your thinking is now, where we go. How do we motivate and inspire people of all ages
TV and film
to both know about them and understand that these are their goals? It's not a government goal or a UN goal. They all belong to us. And I'd be really happy to know what you think.
Well, look, I've been very involved in the SDGs, and actually, we were part of designing the logo and everything for them. I mean, I would love everyone to know more about them. I would love governments to, it's a bad time because so many things are down, but I actually think climate, which, when we did Live Aid, it was debt trade aid, not climate. And I think on the issue that I'm talking about, climate might be oddly enough, the vanguard, because every TV station is thinking, every TV maker is thinking about climate. Asif was talking about he's making a climate thing. And I genuinely think that whenever anyone makes anything about climate, which is a oncoming, catastrophe
that impacts everyone,
SDGs, that everybody would like to know as a result. I mean, honestly, I watched Twisters the other day. Have you seen it?
Yeah, of course.
Very fine. Yeah. But do you know what I mean? After
terrifying.
After Twisters, I want to know what I can do about the environment. And actually, Adam McKay made Don't Look Up, and that was also a film about that. And what I'm talking about is once you've got that, can you lead people to the SDGs? Can you lead people to climate action?
Yeah.
Can you do all those things? But people are nervous because of, as it were, Just Stop Oil and extremist things, and they're made to pull back, and they worry about how they fit into the legal framework. But I think you've got people on there, knowing all about it, being super moved by, David Attenborough, very interesting example.
Very.
Great work by the BBC, and apparently his program was the major driver in people stopping plastic bottles, and interestingly, the BBC did this show called Wild Isles, and they did it with the Royal Society of the Protection of Birds, and the Royal Society of the Protection of Birds actually used that program as a way of recruiting new members. So it's not that it's not there, but if everybody, when they made anything that relates to an important issue,
had that in mind,
sent you to the SDGs, sent you to campaigning organizations, sent you to Climate Facts, we might make more progress.
Hi, June. Hi, Richard. So just going back to your question about works that have impacted you, I know we've talked a lot about I May Destroy You. So that was one I wanted to talk about because, yes, I do feel maybe in terms of you know, the wider perspective. Maybe more could be done. But I know for me, after watching it, you know, I'm you know, not a victim of sexual violence, but people near and dear to me are.
Oh, yeah.
And for me, you know, it was a vehicle to, you know, talk more about it with my loved ones and those that had been affected. And I know I'm probably not, you know, the only one. So it's like, you know, those things, it's like the little drops of water, you know, can
Yes.
still make like a lake or, you know, a flood. So, you know, can
Would
still,
do you think you'd have found it more helpful if there was signposting to how you could help others, perhaps not even just those in your inner circle, but almost been a part of something post that?
yeah, I think perhaps that. I think, though, you know, when we look at, you know, these works of art, I think we also do have a tendency to apply it to our everyday lives, and it's about that everyday interaction with humans. And yes, you know, I know that. Obviously, you know, Michaela wrote it from her own personal experience as well. I mean, I guess, you know, a question I would want to ask is, how do you balance the responsibility between the artist and also, you know, the vehicles that allow...
Well,
the
I
artist
think
to-
that, I mean, that's a really interesting question. And what would filmmakers
Say.
make of it and say? And I think we have to, you know, you would have to test that out. You would have to say, are you willing to do this? Are you happy to do this? I mean, weirdly, I've done lots of campaigning, but strangely, the most effective campaigning television I've ever made might have been The Vicar of Dibley.
And we
Because
love
of the fact that I made it simply as it were a proof positive that female vicars...
For gender equality.
that female vicars are a really good idea. But if anyone had said to me, we need to start a petition of people to write to the church to say, what the world are you doing saying no and no and no again on this? I mean, I would definitely have said yes on that. So I think it is a negotiation. You would have to make sure that people and artists, you know, are comfortable with it. But it's not a question that I think is asked of people, you know, enough and at the moment. And I think as it were, I think it's a sleeping... I mean, it would be interesting to ask all of you, and I hope the answer will be everybody, if you've ever been emotionally moved and passionate as a result of something that you've watched on television and in the movies. How many people feel they've been moved by something they've watched on TV?
Yeah, all of us.
And how many of you have ever taken direct action as a result of something you've watched on TV?
Definitely, yeah.
You see, it's...
Drops off.
Yeah, and it's great, those who have, and I certainly did. The reason we set up Comic Relief was because I'd watched Live Aid. There's absolutely no doubt about it. I think TV is amazing. You know, Kathy Come Home, which is always quoted, led to the setting up of Shelter. The BBC didn't encourage it to happen.
But it
Mr. Bates
happened.
in the post office has led to all those scoundrels being held to account. But it's interesting that in this group, all of you would say, I've been moved, and only 6 of you would say it's led me to direct action.
I'm being told so you're going to have to be very quick. So if you can ask yours, and then you can ask yours, and then Richard, I have one final question, and then we can wrap up. Okay?
Okay, I'll be quick. You mentioned Comic Relief. You mentioned The Vicar of Dibley. The things that were special about those, they're positive, they make us happy, they give us hope. I think you're talking about a lot of, like, how can people have practical tips to do stuff after they've been moved, but a lot of the programs you're talking about, even Attenborough, I can't watch because I end up in despair. I think despair drowns people. They can't find a way forward
Leads
when
to
they're that
inaction,
upset. Hope gives people a way forward. And I think that's where film, telly, media in general can inspire people that there's a point in acting. That's your role. You give us hope, you make us believe, and then we've got the courage to act.
Beautiful.
Well,
Thank you.
And by
Richard,
the way,
can I get this one?
By the way, that's like a really
Thank
like a really important point, and that's why I mentioned Barbie and Inside Out 2. You know, and things like that, where actually there was a great movie called Pride. Do you remember that movie about, you know, and when you feel good again,
You
that's
do
enough.
good.
It's not only
Yeah.
the
Thank
ones that
you.
make you sad. It's the ones that make you happy, and you want more to happen. And nobody would ever say to them and say, "Do you want to have a recruitment campaign, a support show, a thing of the greatest successes?" You know, all of that.
Speaking of hope, the next generation, can we have your question?
I wanted to mention, I think it was discussed this morning about the idea of perhaps instead of having a QR code asking you to do something if you were moved by something at the end of that, something that if a film or TV show wanted to be moving people to change or to be impactful enough to make people care about an issue, then it should do that enough in a way that people would do that of their own accord, or perhaps that action might be more beneficial if you aren't just given, a petition to sign. If you're driven to do something yourself that you come up with that you're interested in through something that you've watched or heard about, and I was wondering your thoughts on that.
Well, no, that's
What's
really
your
interesting.
name?
Do you know?
Genevieve.
Genevieve, she's amazing. The future's bright with Genevieve. Come on, everybody. Thank you, Genevieve.
The thing is, I think we've slightly been relying on that, and my worry is that that's not enough of a prod. That's my concern. I think we need a little bit more, help to get there. I've just written here, what could we do? I think we should link TV programs to places where you can take action.
Mm-hmm.
I think we should have feeder shows so that if you watch something, you could then watch another thing which actually talks about the issue. I think we should make sure that these things are integrated into education,
Yep.
if ever education stops being, a bizarre 19th century artifact. I think we should give the poor actors something to talk about on their PR tours. Do you know what I mean? I think that the UK should take the lead. I think BAFTA should take the lead. And I think that we should talk to filmmakers about it and have filmmakers themselves, proactively say, I've made this thing, what can we do about it? I think we should have an impact producer on every single show that we do. And I think that as such, I think it's a bit of I think it's a bit of a sleeping giant in terms of activism and struggle and information
And impact.
emotion and impact.
And is there anything else you want to leave us with before we wrap up this evening?
I'm very disappointed in Spurs. Today they were 2-0 up, and I got a feeling there was 3-2 at the. So
Do we know what
if
the
you
final score is? 3. Oh gosh. Right.
So I'm disappointed that. No, genuinely, because I talk about action, but I would say that if any of you have been convinced or interested in this argument and know people in telly, in journalism, in film,
All right, yourselves. to the
just say,
broadcaster.
I think that it's a slightly wasted opportunity, and that we could actually. And I think I was so excited. There was an Impact Award on the National Television Awards, and it was won by Mr. Bates and the Post Office. I thought, fantastic. There's an Impact Award. And then I looked back and I saw the last person to win the Impact Award was Gavin and Stacey. And I thought, was that like impact on tourism in South Wales?
Hey.
Or something like that.
All good.
But anything that we can do together to say that I think we could achieve more together
Is a good thing.
is a win.
Brilliant. And on that note, Richard Curtis, everyone. Thank you. Thank you.